Welcome to Becoming Archetype, where we explore the science and strategy of natural health optimization and performance so that you can achieve your ideal self. I am Dr. Ryan Sousley. All right. Hey, welcome back to Becoming Archetype. I'm your host, Dr. Ryan. This is where we talk about the science of strategy of optimal health and performance. So real quick, what is archetype? I get a lot of questions about this. Well, archetype is the ideal. It's the ideal version of yourself. So this whole show, the reason why I'm doing this and every episode is designed to help you become the ideal version of yourself, because that's what I'm trying to do. And that's what I've been trying to help patients do for over 15 years. So today, what we're talking about is something that I get asked questions about almost every single week, and it has to do with fatigue. So we're going to talk about 5 reasons why you might feel exhausted, even though your labs may look totally normal. And so maybe you're the type of person that goes and has blood work done every year, or maybe you've even gotten into some functional testing where you're looking at thyroid numbers, metabolic dysfunction markers, inflammation markers. Maybe you're wearing a continuous glucose monitor, and yet things still look normal, and that can be extremely frustrating. And I just want to start off by saying that I'm a big fan of testing. I think regular testing that you do with your general practitioner is a good idea. I'm an even bigger fan of doing functional tests where you're looking at hormone markers and metabolic pathways and inflammatory markers, things that predispose disease and dysfunction. However, all of those tests really reveal dysfunction and disease after they happen. And so for a lot of people, you have these symptoms, and today we're talking all about fatigue and energy, but you may have test results that look totally normal, and yet you still feel the way you feel. And I think that's more frustrating than anything else, because at the very least, if you have a test result that shows something that's off or, deficient or toxic, in terms of the levels, at least then you have something to point to. Then you have something to actually go and fix. I think it's when everything looks like it's normal. It's kind of like taking your car to the mechanic and they hook it up to the computer and the analysis software, and they look at everything. They check all the hoses and the belts and the fluids, and the mechanic comes back and says, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I don't know why your car is running so poorly, because everything checks out. Everything that we can test actually looks pretty normal. So when it comes to energy and fatigue, I think this is one of the areas where dysfunction shows up first and shows up most abundantly. Meaning, if you're constantly battling with energy issues or fatigue problems, I can guarantee you that you are on your way to a diagnosis, even if you haven't been diagnosed with something yet. And so that's good news, bad news. The bad news is if you're struggling with energy and fatigue on a consistent basis right now, I can almost promise you that you are headed towards a diagnosis if you don't do something about it. The good news is, if you're, like what the title implies today, like you're exhausted, but your labs look normal, you haven't been diagnosed with a disease or a major dysfunction, that's good news, because now there's not a giant fire that we have to put out. We just have to find out where these little sparks are coming from and put them out so that you can change course, right? So there are 5 systems that are involved with energy that I really want to hammer on today. And they're the nervous system, mitochondria, blood sugar, circadian rhythm, or your sleep cycle, and then inflammation, or what I call inflammatory load. Because you'll find out soon enough that there's really no such thing as not having inflammation in your body. And actually that's a good thing, because inflammation works on your behalf. It's part of the immune system response to your environment and stressors and injuries and, sickness and all that. But when your body has too much inflammatory load, then your body's resources get allocated to that instead of giving you energy so that you can go take on the day. So I want to make this super practical today. Reason number 1, your body is in high alert mode. And so basically, if you think about it, this is like if your body was a house and it was just stuck with the alarm going off all the time. It's making all this noise. It's sending off this alert signal. There's flashing lights, but nobody's fixing anything. And so when your nervous system is stuck in sympathetic mode or high alert mode, that's essentially what's happening. Your body allocates all these resources to try to just survive. It's called being in fight or flight. And again, nothing that the body does in response to its environment is bad necessarily. It's just that when there's too much of it, it can become a problem. So think about it this way: when your nervous system is stuck in sympathetic mode or fight or flight, or the alarm is going off, it's doing that because it perceives a threat. It's trying to survive. So kind of like if you're being chased by a bear in the woods, your body would allocate every resource possible to saving your life, to not becoming the bear's dinner. So what happens? Well, your heart rate goes up, cholesterol levels go up, just in case there's an injury, your body can repair that with cholesterol. Your blood sugar goes up, so you have more free floating energy flowing through the body so that your muscles have a more readily available energy source. Short-term memory goes up, but long-term memory goes down, because you don't need to remember your childhood phone number when you're being chased by a bear in the woods. You just need to remember where you parked the car, or where that last tree was that you passed that you could, go back to and climb up, or whatever it might be. So your body always does what's smart given its environment. And so, being in fight or flight is not necessarily bad in and of itself, but the question is, why is my body in this sympathetic mode, this sympathetic dominance? Well, it's because your body is perceiving a threat, and those threats can come from all over, and nobody's immune to any of these things. But these things could be work deadlines, they could be mental and emotional stress, they could be physiological stress, like if you're not getting enough sleep, or you're eating a poor diet, you're not getting enough movement, you're being exposed to toxins from personal care products and cleaners on a regular basis. All these things. And that's the thing, like what you're going to find out today is that usually there's no one thing that causes everything, just like there's no one thing that solves everything. Usually, health and disease is multifactorial, which is good news and bad news. The bad news is there's not just, one bullet to fire that kills everything. There's not just one thing to focus on. You can take small bites out of all these categories and see a big difference. So again, think about it this way: like if your nervous system is stuck in sympathetic dominance, which means fight or flight or survival mode, your body's not worried about making energy. It's worried about spending energy because it perceives a threat. It's just trying to survive. It's trying to see another day, right? So what do you do about it? Well, a couple of really practical things. And again, the whole goal here is to shut the alarm off in the body. It's to shut the alarm off in the house, to switch from sympathetic dominance to parasympathetic dominance, or sympathetic mode, fight or flight mode, into parasympathetic mode, which is also referred to as rest, digest, and repair mode. How do you do that? Well, you've got to be intentional, because in today's day and age, the tendency is for all of us to veer towards sympathetic mode all day long. And it's just, that's kind of the nature of the world that we live in today. But if you're intentional, you can continue to flip the switch back to parasympathetic mode, which puts your body in a state of healing and rest and repair, where your body's actually making energy for you and not just focused on spending it. So here are a couple of things that I personally do in order to flip that switch. Number one, fixed wake time. So the time that you wake up every day, you can control that. You can't always control what time you go to bed, although I think you should try. But if you have kids or a business or a life of any kind, you're not always going to be able to go to bed at the exact same time every day. However, you can control your mornings pretty consistently no matter what. And fixing your wake time does that. Number two, get outside and get in the sunshine. And even if it's cloudy, like sunlight's still getting through the clouds, you just want to get outside first thing in the morning, because it signals to your body that you're up, you're awake, you're out and about, and you're living your life, right? So it kind of resets your circadian rhythm, and it flips the hourglass upside down in terms of your sleep-wake cycle, right? When you wake up in the morning and you're milling about and you're getting your coffee and you're reading or you're watching the news or whatever it might be, and the lights are dim and everything's dark, your brain's having a hard time figuring out, like, are we up now? Are we doing this? Or are we just taking a break from sleep? We're going to go back to bed. What is it? So you want to send very clear signals to your nervous system. Again, if you don't struggle with this doesn't apply. But if you're trying to figure out how to capture more of the energy that your body has, and that's another thing that I want you to know, is that, energy and fatigue is rarely a deficiency issue, meaning it's not that you don't have enough fuel in the tank, right? And if you live in America, this is no surprise to you, but we are overfed and undernourished. Most of us have way more than enough energy that we're carrying around in the form of stored fat, which is really just stored energy, right? Because everything that you eat should just be fuel for your cells so that they can carry out their function and do their job. So if your body's not using that energy, it's really efficient at storing it away for a later date, because even that's a survival mechanism. Because, thousands of years ago, like, we would eat a woolly mammoth or whatever, and our body didn't actually know when the next meal was that we were going to have. And so our body got really, really good and adapted to be able to store energy away for later use, just in case we had to go a few days without eating, or maybe even a week. Today, that's not the case, right? I mean, most of us walk 20 feet to the refrigerator every 2 to 3 hours, grab a snack, but neurologically and genetically, our bodies are still wired to store away energy that we're not using currently. But if you're constantly consuming more energy or fuel than you're using, then you're going to become overweight and eventually obese. You get it, right? So that was number 2, morning outdoor light. And then number 3 is reduce late night cognitive stress. What causes late night cognitive stress? Well, only you can answer that question. For some people, watching Netflix and scrolling Instagram, those things relax them. For a lot of people, it stirs them up and it activates their sympathetic nervous system. So I'm not here to judge. I will say that for the vast majority of people, getting off of screens of any kind, whether it's TV or your phone, social media, email, getting off of your screen at least an hour, preferably 2 hours before you actually go to bed, make a massive difference with your neurological activation, meaning sympathetic versus parasympathetic, right? Because if you think about it, like if you're watching whatever, Magnum PI or some kind of action flick on Netflix, your nervous system gets all ramped up. If you're scrolling social media, unfortunately, it's a big popularity contest, and it's really easy to not feel the best about yourself when you're scrolling through everybody else's highlight reel. That activates your fight or flight, right? Because your brain primitively perceives all those other people who are succeeding and you're not succeeding to the same level. Your brain perceives that as a threat, right? Because again, that's a survival mechanism, right? Even animals do that. Animals size each other up, and there's a pecking order, and there's a leader of the pack. And, all of a sudden, if one of the wolves feels like it's lowest on the totem pole, it's gonna get angry and it's gonna act out because it doesn't want to be the weakest. Screens in general activate your sympathetic nervous system. Getting off screens is a good way to flip that switch back to parasympathetic. And then I would even say, like dimming the lights, getting the blue light out of your house, dimming the lights, reading, listening to softer music. If you really struggle with being really wound up before bed, you can even do things like a lavender and eucalyptus Epsom salt bath. I mean, do that with low light and some really soft music. I mean, it'd be really hard not to fall asleep after doing that, I promise you, just because Epsom salt's full of magnesium salts that relax your muscles. And then doing that combined with getting rid of screens can really relax your nervous system. So that was number 1. Your body's on high alert mode. It's like the alarm's going off in the house. So the idea is to shut the alarm off and flip the switch from sympathetic to parasympathetic. Okay, reason number 2 that you might feel exhausted even though your labs look normal is that your cells are out of shape. A lot of people think that their energy just comes from the food that they eat. And that is partially true, but the food that you eat only becomes energy if your cells can actually turn those nutrients into fuel, right? And again, that's like what I said earlier, so many Americans today are overfed and undernourished. It's like, why am I so tired? I eat 4,000 calories a day and I'm 50 pounds overweight. Like I have all this fuel that I'm carrying around with me. I mean, even if you're 10 pounds overweight, like you have enough stored fuel on your body to do a complete restrictive food fast for over a month, and you'll be in no danger of developing dysfunction or having a major problem, like dying. Like you're not going to die of starvation, and even if you're right where you should be in terms of body fat percent, like even then you've got 2 to 4 weeks before you should really consider consuming some more food. So my whole point is most of us have more than enough energy stored on our bodies. And yet if we go 3 or 4 hours without eating, we feel famished and we feel super tired. So why is that? Why is it that we have all this energy and yet we feel like we have to put more fuel in the tank and we're still tired, right? Well, it's because your cells are out of shape. So you've got these little organelles inside of every cell called mitochondria, and they actually make energy. They make what's called ATP. It's like the energy currency that your cells use for energy. And why do your cells need energy? Well, because every cell in your body has a job, right? Like your heart cells do heart things. Your digestive cells do digestive things. Your muscle cells do muscle things. So without ATP, your cells are not going to have enough energy to do their job. If your cells don't have enough energy, you don't have enough energy and you feel tired all the time. So that's number one. Number two is that mitochondria adapt to demand. They're trainable. So that's good news, bad news. If you're chronically fatigued right now, bad news is you probably trained your cells to be that way. The good news is that you can retrain them, but you've got to do something different, right? If you keep doing what you've done, you're going to get what you've always gotten. We all get that. So how do so what does that mean? Well, it means that either you've been too sedentary, and so your cells are sluggish and they just have zero endurance, like someone who never works out, like you put them on a track and they're going to get tired after walking a lap, right? So that can happen. The other thing can happen too, though, is where they're fatigued all the time because you're running at such a, not literally, although maybe, but you're running your life at such a pace and with such little recovery in between that your cells are just burned out. Right. And this is where for a lot of people, they get frustrated because they're like, well, I barely even have time to go to the gym. So why am I so fatigued? It's not like I'm using all this energy because I'm going to the gym 2 or 3 times, a day or for an hour or two every time or whatever it might be. I'm just going to work. Yeah. But if your work is really stressful, like if your sympathetic nervous system is on all day long and then you only go get 4 or 5 hours of decent sleep, and then you're living on caffeine and you're not nourishing your body adequately with real food and it's all processed fast junk, that's a great way to burn your cells out. And so your mitochondria become burned out and then they go into survival mode, right? So it's like your body can still produce energy, but at this point, when your cells are out of shape, it's not like your mitochondria stop working altogether. They still make energy for your cells. It just becomes very metabolically expensive. That means a lot of input for very little output, right? So what do you do about it? Well, number one, yes, work out, but you got to be really careful. If you feel like you're more on the burned out side of the spectrum, then you want to be careful. And I would recommend doing more zone 2 or below training, meaning your heart rate doesn't get above zone 2. And if you need to go look that up, it's pretty simple. But zone 2 basically means like when you're working out, you could still have a conversation with whoever you're working out with, right? So like if you're on a jog and you can't talk to your partner, you're probably above zone 2. I mean, you can actually measure it with heart rate monitors and smart devices and that kind of stuff. But the general rule of thumb is if you can't talk to your buddy while you're working out, you're above zone 2. Why does that matter? Well, above zone 2 is a very stressful thing neurologically for your body. Not a bad thing, but if you're already on the end of the spectrum where your cells and your mitochondria are burned out, you probably want to minimize the amount of that type of working out, that super high intensity style of workout, and maybe focus for a season on more zone 2 workouts, right? So that would be like, a light jog, light swim, light bike, elliptical, Stairmaster, and if you have a smartwatch, Apple Watch, Garmin, something like that, very easy to track. But again, the general rule of thumb is if you can have a conversation with your buddy, you're probably in zone 2. Next one is do strength training. I'm a huge fan of strength training. I mean, this is an excellent way to condition your body to be more endurant and to build fortitude so that you're just, one of my favorite sayings is strong people are harder to kill. And that's metaphorical, but I think that's actually literal too. Like if you have muscle, if you have balance, if you have coordination, I like to think about like, okay, if I was alive 2000 years ago, would I be fit enough to survive in nature, right? Like that's how we should all think, even though most of what we do, nowadays is indoors and on technology and all that. I get that, but you know, human health principles haven't changed, even though our lifestyle has. So do strength training 2 to 3 times a week. You just want to be careful not to go to failure. So again, I don't think this is most people's problem that listen to the show, but you just want to be careful not to go to failure because again, it's a very neurologically taxing event to work out so hard that you're literally failing during reps. And I'm not against that, but again, if you're battling with chronic fatigue, you should probably avoid that for a period of time. And then the last one is to make sure that you're consuming adequate protein and calories. And again, adequate protein and calories means that you're feeding your body real food, real fuel. You're not consuming protein and calories because you don't have enough fuel. It's because you probably don't have the right type of fuel. And I think protein is probably one of the most deficient macronutrients that we experience as a culture today, which sounds crazy because so many people, like I keep saying, are overfed and undernourished. However, most people eat, 5 to 10 times the amount of carbohydrates that they actually need in a given day, and probably only eat 20 to 30% of the amount of protein that they actually need. So I would switch that, right? Give up the carbs or give up a lot of the carbs for a period of time and substitute that with high quality protein. All right, moving on. Reason number 3 that you might feel exhausted even though your labs look normal is that you're on an energy roller coaster. And this has to do with blood sugar variability. Think about this like if you're a car and you're constantly hitting the gas and then slamming on the brakes and then hitting the gas and slamming on the brakes, it's fatiguing. Your body, your metabolism, your body doesn't know what to do because you have such highs and lows. And really where this comes from is glucose spikes. And, this is a good segue from the last section because this happens when you consume a lot of carbohydrates and then you don't. And then a lot of carbohydrates and then you don't because you get this huge dump of glucose into your blood. So your pancreas produces a ton of insulin to get the glucose out of your blood and into your cells. And then you go on this crash because a lot of glucose, then a lot of insulin. Insulin takes almost, as much of the glucose out of the blood as necessary. And then your body feels like it's in a deficit because the glucose is gone. So then this is where, a lot of people, they'll eat a snack or they'll eat a meal that's really high in carbohydrates, especially like simple carbohydrates like white flour and processed flour, packaged foods. And then like they'll just feel so full and satiated. And then like an hour or 2 later, they feel super hungry or famished again. This is a perfect example of that. When your body is in a state of metabolic flexibility, which is really where we're trying to get to, right? Metabolic inflexibility means I've got to have carbs. If I don't have carbs, I'm going to be starving. Carbs is the only source of energy that my body knows how to burn. That's not healthy because then if you don't eat carbs, you're going to feel exhausted even if you're 50 pounds overweight and you have all this fuel that your body could use. What we want to try to aspire to is metabolic flexibility, which means your body can burn carbs, but it's actually really efficient and almost has a preference towards burning fat instead. Why is that beneficial? Well, number one, if you're trying to lose fat, then how awesome would it be if your metabolism was conditioned to burn fat? Because then you wouldn't even have to eat anything. And it's like, I don't need a meal until all this extra fuel in the tank gets used up. And I'm not saying to do that because for some people that would be like weeks or months. What I am saying is metabolic flexibility creates a situation where you can go long periods of time without eating, which I'm not recommending all the time, but you can, and you don't feel super, fatigued or lethargic because your body knows how to burn fat for fuel. And you get a lot more even blood sugar regulation, that's the whole point of this reason, right? The energy roller coaster. That's what leads to chronic fatigue. It's because your metabolism and your cells get confused. They don't know what to do because there's so much energy and then there's not enough. And then there's so much energy and then there's not enough. Creating a more even keel, blood sugar situation is a lot better for sustained energy, regardless of whether you eat. I mean, where you want to try to get to is you feel like you have the same amount of energy after a 36-hour fast as you do like right after eating a bunch of fruit or some bread or pasta, which I know most people feel actually lethargic, which is kind of ironic, isn't it? Like you eat all this carb heavy meal, and carbohydrates are supposed to be, the quick energy macro. And yet, because most people overdo it, right after the fact, you don't feel like you have all this extra energy. You feel like going to take a nap, which I always thought was kind of ironic. So what do you do about it? Well, number one, I would recommend doing protein first at every meal. And I kind of alluded to this in the last reason, but when you eat protein first, it fills you up a lot more and a lot faster than carbohydrates, and it keeps you fuller for longer, right? So that like the next time you go out to eat, or if you're going to make a meal at home, I promise, just try this for like a week. And if I'm wrong, leave a comment and you'll be the anomaly. Because I promise I've done this with so many people. I know it's almost unequivocally true. But when you eat protein first, you're a lot less likely to pig out on carbohydrates, right? Like if you go to Olive Garden, like get a steak, eat the entire steak, then try to gorge yourself on pasta and breadsticks, I can almost guarantee you it's not going to happen, right? And what most people do is they do the opposite, right? Like they eat a bunch of chips at a Mexican restaurant before the enchilada comes out, or they eat a bunch of breadsticks at Olive Garden before the dish comes out. And then by the time, then they end up taking half of their steak home in a box because they're so full, they can't even finish their main course. So eat protein first. The second thing is avoid isolated carbs, especially for breakfast. What does that mean? Like what that means is don't just go have a bunch of toast. Don't just go have a bunch of fruit. Like try to always consume carbohydrates with protein. Your body's going to utilize the nutrients and the energy, the glucose more efficiently that way. But again, it's also going to help to prevent the overconsumption of carbohydrates. I do want to say this, if you're a high level athlete, like if you're an endurance athlete, you run marathons, you're exercising for 1 to 2 hours a day, every single day, and you're doing like high intensity or long duration endurance training, you probably need a lot more carbohydrate than the average person. If that's not you, so the other 98% of you that are listening, a general rule of thumb is you should be able to feel amazing and achieve your ideal body composition, your ideal body weight, by never consuming more than about 30% of your daily calories from carbohydrates. So what does that mean? Well, that means if you eat 2,000 calories a day, you should feel totally fine and actually feel really, really good, and eventually move towards a more ideal body composition and weight by never consuming more than 600 calories of carbohydrates every single day, right? And I'm not going to get too much into the macronutrients and counting them and breakdowns and percentages and all that stuff. All I'm saying is like so many people get worried that if they cut their carbs, by that much, which actually is not that much. I mean, if you're trying to do keto, like you're cutting way more than that. But a lot of people get worried like, oh, if I'm not eating bread, if I'm not eating rice or pasta or crackers or chips or cookies or even a bunch of fruit, like I'm not going to have any carbs, I'm going to be tired all the time. Guess what? For the first week or two, you probably will be. But that doesn't mean your body's deficient. It means that you're retraining your metabolism to learn how to burn fat again for fuel. And if you can just get over that hump, if you can be disciplined and stick with it long enough to just make yourself do it for a couple of weeks, I promise how you're going to feel on the other side is it's so worth it that you probably never go back, right? I mean, I've been doing this for probably 20, 21 years now, and it's not even appealing to me like to eat a whole pizza like I used to in high school, or, get seconds and thirds at Olive Garden. Like to me, that just sounds like I'm going to be tired for the next 3 days. I'd rather eat a bunch of high quality protein and maybe have a breadstick or a little bit of pasta as like a side while I'm eating my steak and salad, right? And it's not because I'm ultra disciplined now. It's just because my body feels so good by following these principles that it's just not even appealing to go back to doing it the other way. Okay. And then here's reason number 4, why you may feel exhausted, even though your labs might look totally normal. Your internal clock is off. And really what this boils down to is your circadian rhythm. It's when you go to sleep and it's when you wake up. this is kind of like living in the wrong time zone. It's almost like your body's in jet lag mode all the time. And it actually, it makes sense, from a hormone standpoint. Like, think about the actual cycles of the sun. I live in North Idaho. And so right now we're in the middle of winter. Days are very short, right? But 6 months from now, we're going to have days that are like, 20 hours long almost. But nature doesn't flip that switch overnight. If it did, my body would have no idea what to do, right? It would feel awake when it was supposed to feel tired, and it would feel tired when it was supposed to feel awake. And a lot of it just has to do with sun exposure, right? Now, some of this has to do with exercise and nutrition and mindset and hydration and all those things. But even just in terms of, sunlight exposure, like, there's a reason why nature does that slowly. It's not an overnight thing. Otherwise, that would be super unhealthy. Our hormones would be all over the place, no matter how healthy your lifestyle was. When you go to bed at an inconsistent time and you wake up at an inconsistent time routinely, it's kind of like going from winter to summer and back and forth, or going from, North Idaho to London and back and forth and back and forth. It's like, yeah, your hormones are never going to know what to do or when to release, right? And so the main hormones that really get affected by this are cortisol, which is your body's stress hormone, which has a direct impact on melatonin, which is a sleep hormone, right? So cortisol is not bad for you, but cortisol should really be high in the morning, because that's, it's your stress hormone, which, again, stress is not a bad thing. Stress is what gets you out of bed. It's what causes you to charge hard through the day, to have goals and pursue those goals. So obviously cortisol should be higher in the morning, because that's when you're getting ready to go after it. But cortisol should gradually, decline as the day goes on, so that by the time evening rolls around, cortisol is at its lowest. And then inversely, melatonin is really low in the morning, because melatonin is the sleep hormone. You don't want to be sleepy when you just woke up. But inversely, as cortisol gets lower throughout the day, melatonin starts to rise, so that by the time you go to bed, melatonin is at its peak and cortisol has bottomed out. All of that is massively impacted by sun exposure and the time of day that you go to bed and wake up. Your hormones become trained. So if one day you go to bed at midnight, and the next day, because you're trying to catch up or whatever, you go to bed at 8, but then the next night it's 1 a.m. and then, relatively you're waking up at all different times, all different days, your hormones are never going to know what to do. And so you're going to feel wired and tired, right? So the way to set your internal clock is really easy, but it does require a little bit of discipline. Try to go to bed within 30 minutes on either side of the same time every night. So let's say you normally go to bed at 10, or 10 is your target. That's fine. It doesn't have to be exactly 10 every day, but try to make it a goal to always go to sleep between 9:30 and 10:30. Does that make sense? So if 10 is the target, you never want to deviate more than 30 minutes on either side. And then the same principle works with wake time. So if you go to bed at 10, you should probably wake up at, let's say, 6. That gives you a solid 8 hours. But you don't have to wake up exactly at 6 every day. You just want to set your wake time to be within the window of 5:30 to 6:30. Does that make sense? So you've got an hour window in wake time. You've got an hour window of going to bedtime. There's a lot of leniency. There's a lot of grace. You don't have to be super militant. I will say, the tighter you get with this, and you could test this. Do this for a week, and I promise your sleep is going to get better. You're going to have way more energy throughout the day. And again, a lot of people think that the energy that they feel through the day has so much to do with, or so much more to do with, how long they slept than it actually does. And listen, I'm not saying, you're okay to just get 5 to 6 hours of sleep. Like, you really should try to get at least 7, if not 8. Some people need even more than that, like closer to 9. So yes, there's value in getting enough sleep, like the number of hours, but what matters even more than that, and I think if you had to choose between one of the two, going to bed at midnight and waking up at 5 every single day would be more valuable. I'm not saying do this. Don't do that, because that's only 5 hours. But if you had to choose, doing that is more valuable than getting 8 hours every night, but having it vary by 2 to 3 hours, throughout the week. because it's too confusing for your hormones. They never get trained, right? And your body thinks it's in a different time zone or in a different season all the time. And so your immune or your hormone system, your endocrine system just can't keep up. Okay. And then here's reason number 5. Your energy is being diverted to defense. And I alluded to this at the very beginning, but this has to do with inflammation. So this is kind of like a city that's always in emergency mode. And so all of the budget goes to defense systems and, making sure that we have enough water and we have enough supplies and enough food, because there's always a tornado that's blowing through the city. So inflammation is how your body deals with injuries and stress. And so a little bit of inflammation is a good thing. It's what keeps us healthy and it's what repairs things before they get out of control. But if your body is constantly under, more stress than it should be, and I'm not just talking about physical stress. Like, I don't think the average person is constantly dealing with like a lot of physical injuries all at once, although that does happen, but usually that's more, people that work labor jobs or athletes. For most people, it's really subtle forms of stress that they may not even be consciously aware of, but it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? Like, some of that stress can come from lack of sleep, like we just talked about. Some of that stress can come from dehydration. Some of that stress can come from lack of adequate movement, either not enough or not the right kind. Some of that stress can come from poor nutrition, like not enough of the right stuff and too much of the bad stuff. Some of that stress can come from toxins, which we didn't really get into today, but toxins can be extremely stressful to the body and cause inflammation because of what they do to cells and even the expression of your genetics, your DNA. So the bottom line is, if the inflammatory load or the total amount of inflammation, again, usually not from one thing, but the accumulative amount of inflammation in your body supersedes what your body can handle naturally, but still stay focused on the task at hand. Well, now all of a sudden you've got, it's like a city that's under emergency control or warning. All of the resources get diverted to putting out the fires instead of growing and building the city, right? And again, this is where a lot of people end up frustrated, because you eat enough and you feel like you get enough sleep. Maybe even you work out, you take supplements. This is a big one. A lot of people take a lot of supplements for inflammation, but they're not actually putting out the cause of the fire. So, and this is like, just as a side note, I'm a big fan of supplements. I take a lot of supplements myself. I recommend that for people that want to take supplements, it is a good idea to do some functional testing just to see exactly what you do need or what your body needs and what it doesn't need, because no two people are the exact same. And just because, someone on social media or even someone like me on a podcast said that vitamin D is good for you doesn't necessarily mean that every human on planet Earth needs the exact same amount or type of vitamin D. And for some people, they don't even need vitamin D, right? So I do think there's value in doing some testing. So I'm not against supplements, but I think this is one of the categories where people that do take a lot of supplements or spend a lot of money or intention on supplements can get really frustrated. But the reality is that there's no amount of supplements that will put the fire out until you actually figure out where the fire is coming from, if that makes sense, right? Like, so if you're under a tremendous amount of stress at work or interpersonal relationship stress or lack of movement, lack of nutrition, poor sleep, like, there's no amount of supplements that you can take that are going to fix all of those things. You might feel better for a period of time, but eventually nature and physiology always wins. So you either end up needing to take more of those supplements, or now those supplements turn into a medication, and still you're just chasing symptoms without fixing the underlying root cause of the problem. So what do you do about it? Well, number one, you want to improve sleep, because sleep is one of the most anti-inflammatory periods. In fact, I would say it's the most anti-inflammatory period of your day. Number two is to remove ultra processed foods. Processed foods, packaged foods that have preservatives or fake ingredients, which, by the way, how do you know whether or not a food product has real ingredients or fake ingredients? Well, if you can't pronounce the ingredients on the back of the box, almost guaranteed it's fake food. It was processed. It was made in a laboratory. It was made in a plant, didn't come from a plant, that whole thing. But remove ultra processed foods. If you just eat real whole foods are almost always anti-inflammatory, because God knew what he was doing when he gave us food to eat on planet Earth. And we went ahead and messed it up by trying to make it last forever or taste better. And it turns out almost everything that man does to real food that's found in nature is inflammatory. Isn't that interesting? If we would just eat the food that God gave us to eat on planet Earth, those foods are naturally anti-inflammatory. But when we go and we start to mess with them to make them taste better or last longer or be more addictive or whatever, look better in a package, like colorings and that kind of thing, they become more inflammatory because they're further away from what nature intended. Next thing is to, and again, I don't think this is most people's problem, but if it is, definitely something to be aware of, reduce excessive training. And excessive training, again, this is like you're at the gym or working out for like 2 to 3 hours a day and you're just crushing yourself and you feel exhausted and you're going to failure every time you're working out. I don't think that's most people. However, I have experienced that and I can tell you it's very real. And it's also very frustrating if you're this type of person. In fact, the most tired, consistently tired that I ever felt was when I was in the middle of Ironman training. And I was also trying to follow a really strict diet. So I was undernourished. I wasn't getting enough protein. I wasn't getting enough sleep. We were also in the middle of having kids. Like we had a bunch of little kids in diapers at the time. Our business was growing and I was trying to train for an Ironman and I was trying to not take it out of my family. So I was up early, up late, all the things in between. And man, I totally burned my thyroid out. And a lot of it had to do with overtraining, but I was overtraining without enough recovery and without proper recovery nutrition. Again, it doesn't mean you have to stop training. Just do more zone 2 training versus training where you just crushing yourself the whole time. Okay, so those are the 5 things. I want to recap these again, just real quick in case you missed it. But number 1, reason why you might feel exhausted even though your labs look normal, your body's in high alert mode. Again, this is where your house is stuck in alarm mode, but nobody's actually fixing the problem. So your body diverts all these resources to being on alert, like your body's stuck in sympathetic mode or survival mode. Number 2 was your cells are out of shape. You got to remember that your mitochondria, your little engines that produce energy in every cell in your body, they're trainable, but you have to train them, right? So you have to condition them, just like workers in a factory. Even if you have enough workers or enough factories, if they're not trained, they're going to be very inefficient. It's going to be very expensive to produce the final product versus a little bit of training creates a lot better efficiency. Reason number 3 was your energy's on a roller coaster. So again, this is like hitting the gas and the brakes all the time. This comes from large dumps of glucose or carbohydrate meals followed by none. So to even this out, reduce your carbs significantly, replace carbs with protein, eat your protein first, your energy levels will level out and your hormones will follow suit. Number 4, your internal clock is off. Again, this is like living in a different time zone all the time or changing seasons from day to day. So the action step here was to set your go to bed and your wake time at the same time every day and never deviate more than 30 minutes on either side. That'll give your cortisol and your melatonin levels a chance to even out. And then the last one was that your energy is being diverted because of inflammation. So again, this is really where you got to look at where are those death by 1,000 cuts coming from and how can I tackle one at a time? And it's usually not one. So don't change one thing and then in a week come back to me and say, oh, it didn't work. It wasn't that. No, let's go find 5 to 10 things, do that for a month, and then see where we're at in terms of energy levels. So I hope this was helpful for you. I know it's helped a ton of people in my clinic over the years. Again, I get asked this question all the time. I mean, every week I get asked about energy and fatigue. And for a lot of people, because I see people that are typically into health and living a more natural, holistic lifestyle, this can be very frustrating because you feel like you're doing all the right things and yet your energy levels just aren't where they should be, and you don't have a diagnosis. Again, if you have a diagnosis or something that's identifiable on a test of any kind, it's almost better, right? Because then you have a target to aim at very specifically. It's when you don't have a definitive answer, then it's like, I don't know. There's no diagnosis. There's nothing we could put our finger on. But that's good news, bad news. The good news is that your body hasn't entered a state of dis-ease or dysfunction to that magnitude yet. That's the good news. The bad news is it's probably not one thing that you're going to do or focus on or take that's going to solve your problem. We got to start looking at this multifactorially from as many angles as possible and just make small corrections in as many of these categories as you can. Hey, thanks for spending some time with me today. I'll see you on the next show.